Now. And yeah, let's get started. So welcome and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our event today. So the title of the event is Food for Thought, 3 different perspectives on the circular economy and food. And we're going to hear about how to turn food waste into another type of food or beverage for this matter, how to turn seafood waste into compostable materials, and how to make your own grocery shopping more circular. So 3 very different perspectives, and we're really grateful to have 3 amazing speakers for these perspectives here today. Just a quick note about myself. So my name is Laura Pohl-Martel. I'm the president of the Circular Economy Society at LSE. Yeah, the society, for those of you who are not aware, was founded just recently, and we're just aiming to promote the circular economy among the LSE students by hosting events around different topics related to the circular economy, and by thereby connecting experts in the field with students and just generally bringing more awareness to the topic. So let's move on, and I'm going to hand over to our treasurer, Ben, who's going to introduce our first 2 speakers.
Yes, Lara, thanks a lot for hanging over. Yes, also hello from me to all of you. My name's Ben. I'm, as Lara already said, the treasurer at the Circular Economy Society, and I kind of took a part in organizing this event. I'm very happy that you're all here, and especially happy to have our 3 amazing speakers here. In a minute, I will hand over to Daniel, who is going to represent Knärzje today. Knärzje is brewing beer out of leftover bread, but he's going to give us a little bit more information on that in a minute, which I find a really interesting concept and idea, especially as we are as students, obviously all taking a sip of beer once in a while. So I think that will be very interesting to hear. Next, we will have Insiya. Insiya is the CEO and founder of the Shellworks, and they are actually producing different packaging and containers and so on out of seafood waste. So I'm really interested to hear what they do, and they are located in London as well. So that's also quite interesting. And then last but not least, Jessica, the owner of Jarr Market, is going to talk to us from a consumer perspective and tell us how we can maybe make a difference by buying in zero waste grocery stores. Yes, so thanks again to all 3 of you for coming, and I'm going to hand over to Daniel from Knärzje now.
Perhaps if I can just jump in real quick in terms of the structure of the event for you in the audience. We're going to have a Q&A session after the talks our speakers give. So whenever you come up with a question, you can either feel free to type it into the chat, potentially with the name of the speaker if it's directed to a specific speaker, or you can also just raise your hand when we get to the Q&A session and then ask your question personally or verbally. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Daniel.
All right, then. Well, also from my side, warm welcome. I'm happy to be here and talk about my startup or the idea or general my commitment. Because by now, I think for 10 years, I'm fighting against food waste, but the majority of the time was as an board member of a small NGO in Frankfurt. So basically I was offering my leisure time in order to do cooking events and talks and workshops and that stuff. But as of 2019, I founded my first startup, since I was a freelancer by then for 2 years. And because I thought the idea of Knärzje itself was quite promising. And so I took all my courage and founded a GmbH in Germany, you would say, so a company. And I got some slides for you, a small presentation to give you a better understanding about what I'm really doing. So I would just start sharing my screen, hoping that you by now see the slides. You do?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So basically it's about a beer, and we Germans are, I guess, one could say, quite famous for brewing good beer. And we are also quite famous for baking good bread. And I was quite surprised that nobody, as far as I was concerned back then, was bringing those two things together, because we know that because of the fact that we bake so much bread, we waste also a lot of bread. And bread beer itself, if you will, was the invention of beer itself 5,000 years ago. Once a loaf of bread fell into a bucket of water, and just 2 or 3 days later, people had to eat the bread because, if you will, food was scarce, but it made a lot of more fun back then because some alcohol was already in the bucket. So the first beer itself was a bread beer, and now 5,000 years later, do the exact same thing. First of all, the name Knärzje, I think it's quite hard to pronounce for some of you guys. This is in fact the dialect term of 2 federal states here in Germany for the end piece of a loaf of bread. So basically, we also have, in fact, we do have 200 words in Germany. So if you would put a map of Germany in the background, you would see that in the north, and the south, or west and east of Germany, we have lots of different terms just for the end piece of a loaf of bread, because we Germans love bread so much. And also quite funny because normally if you will, the first piece, the initial piece of a fresh bread is eaten with pleasure. Everybody loves it. But then the tough end piece is often left over, and it was eventually thrown into the bin. And this is also why in some regions we have a laughing and a crying end piece. So in Münsterland we call it Lacheknäppchen and Weineknäppchen. You don't understand it since it's German, but basically it says it's one piece that is laughing and the other one that is crying, because it ends up in the bin eventually. And also quite funny, since the shape of the bread end is also, if you're reminiscent of another end, in fact the human butt, we tenderly joke about the end piece of a loaf of bread. And for instance, in Westerwald, so some region in Germany, we say Poppes or Ärschel, which is also, which are words for the German or the human butt eventually. So 200 words for just the same thing. And most importantly, would you ask yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? And this is the central question of my startup. So basically what we do is that we want to put more attention to the topic of zero waste. But in Germany, at least I think for the longest time, zero waste did circulate about packaging or plastic bags, and not really about food. But if we speak about the potential of ecological impacts, zero food waste, the impact or the potential is far, far bigger than avoiding plastic bags. Because if you will, avoiding food waste might be the single biggest measurement we have in the fight against climate change from a food perspective. So even bigger than avoiding meat, for instance. So I was aware of that fact, and I was also aware of the fact that, if you will, food waste, was it a country, is the 3rd biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions globally after China and the US, which is a huge amount, because 3.3 gigatons annually of CO2 or CO2 equivalents rise due to the fact that we waste so much food. And just compared to Germany, in all its industry, its mobility, its energy, it's 4 times as high just by throwing away food that most of the times is still perfectly edible. And we do by now have a large scientific, if you will, body of studies and analyses looking at that topic. And maybe one of the biggest studies there is Project Drawdown, which, if you will, looked at all the measures that humanity could take in the fight against climate change, said that reducing food waste is, compared to the greenhouse gas emissions that we could save, the 3rd biggest measurement after onshore wind turbines and solar photovoltaics, which I think is a big deal. It's a huge deal. And if we consider the fact that around 40% of all the food that we produce ends up in the bin, I think it's no wonder. And just looking at baked goods, for instance, so bread and all that stuff, in Germany alone, so the bread that comes from small bakery shops, because it hasn't been sold, sums up around 600,000 tons of baked goods, which, if you would put it into trucks, would end up an equivalent from Frankfurt to Munich. Just lots of trucks filled with baked goods that would end up in the bin. And I think this is quite impressive and quite sad at the same time. So I was thinking about doing a contribution against that. And I think if we talk about future, if you will, production patterns, the circular economy is the way to go, because we know that the linear system, as it has been for the last decades and hundreds of years, led to the fact that we by now live in a society of abundance. But the flip side, we live also in a pretty wasteful society. And if we look at the zero waste hierarchy, I'm not quite sure, or maybe some of you guys already seen that. Dealing with food, I think the best way, of course, is to avoid any waste. So to prevent food waste from occurring, if we have surplus, we should put it into people's mouths, into human mouths. If we have the chance, we can convert it into another product, which is basically what we are doing. And then, of course, we can speak about putting it into pigs, for instance, or generally as stock, live animal feed. Before, and this is also, I think, the biggest way Germans go these days is to just simply burn it in biogas facilities. So basically generate power out of it. But if you look at the ecological impact again, there are, if you like you see on that slide, several ways that could work better for us. And what we do now at Knärzje is we do convert surplus bread, leftover bread, dry it, and then put it into small pieces like this, and then substitute up to 1/3 of the brewing malt that is normally needed for brewing beer. So if you will, a big resource substitution during the production process, and it ends up in these bottles. I do have one here. Unfortunately, I couldn't send you one beforehand, but I can tell that it's just a pretty tasty beer that may be the most sustainable beer there is in Germany, since we just also, as of last year, got ecologically organic certified. And so we are not only zero waste, we're also organic, and we have a regional production and, if you will, sales distribution network. So from a sustainability perspective, I think we're quite good. And what we eventually try to do is to combine pleasure with sustainability, or to combine joy, because in Germany, if you will, talking about sustainability, there are often two, if you will, teams: the ones that try to save the world, and the others that fear that have the big fear of their steak disappearing on the plates, or that they cannot fly to Mallorca once in a while. Because normally sustainability is just an either or. It's not very pleasant discussion here in Germany. And we just want to show that there are other ways, there are alternatives that are more sustainable. And we do that by saving one slice of bread per bottle of beer. And in Germany, this saying makes a lot more sense, because anstoßen, etwas größeren anzustoßen, basically means we want to put our glasses or our bottles in the sky in order to start something bigger, in order to make a contribution against food waste, and to show that the future, if you will, of production as well as consumption needs to be more circular, and that the linear model of the past isn't a good future model itself. And with that, I'm open for questions. Thanks for the attention.
Thanks, Daniel. I think let's save the questions for once all speakers have given their talks, and then just do a general discussion. And let's move on to Insiya, if that's okay.
Hi, so just as a quick intro, I'm Insiya. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Shellworks, where our big mission is to make plastic waste a thing of the past. And the way that we do that is actually using waste resources like seafood waste, which is where we started, to be used as a feedstock in order to extract biopolymers that we could then make into usable materials. So I have a little bit of a different take to Daniel's presentation, which was great. But I thought it would be kind of interesting, since we did actually do this project during our masters, to show you how we did it during our masters and how that turned into like a master's project, into a startup, and like where we've grown from there. So I can kind of also share my screen and we can go from there. So Yeah. So yeah, I guess kind of what I touched on was that our big mission is to create a new category of materials that performs like plastic but can degrade in any natural environment. And I think one of the things that we found quite early on is that there are so many bioplastics that need specific conditions, and I think that's become a really big pain point for companies, consumers, really to understand what to do with these materials, and it often requiring additional infrastructure. So that was really what we honed in on and what we wanted to create a solution for. But what did we start with? So we started with seafood waste. And to be honest, when we started the project, we would literally go to restaurants and collect their waste, bring it back, take it to the lab, we would analyze it. So this is kind of actually the fiber we would use at the end of the day. It's something called chitin. And chitin exists in the shell underneath minerals and protein layers. So you actually have to strip those away to get to chitin. And then once you have the shell, you go to chitin, you can actually just add simple things like vinegar to get this bioplastic material that we then would take in foam. But really, like, where we started was we did this as a joint master's between Imperial College and the Royal College of Art. And so we actually just started with chemistry experiments in a chemistry lab, very, very lo-fi, like literally just using the most basic things we could find, experimenting really quickly. We had like really varied results. And it was a lot of like playful experimentation when we first started. And we did everything from like, you know, all of these machines were like kind of hand built. We did everything from just like, if we had an idea, we were like, why don't we just try it? So we built our own little vacuum former, tried to vacuum form a material. So I think a lot of it was just like hands-on, really trying to experiment what we could do with the boundaries of this material. I think towards the end of the project, we kind of came to a proof of concept, and that's really what you would probably see if you Google Shellworks now is like, you know, we have these different kind of variations of this material. And in tandem, we proposed some applications of how it could be used. So it could be used as a plant pot, kind of makes sense because at its end of life, you can plant it in the ground. It's also a natural fertilizer. And so we kind of, at the initial stages, we really were experimenting how we could express this as a project and put it out in the world. In the same time, we found that manufacturing was a gap with this material. And so we also built our own kind of machines and developed that end of things as well. But really where it all started to change was we were kind of flown out to New York to present our project at the time to the Wall Street Journal. And I think that's when people started asking us questions of like, how are you going to sell this? What is the price point? What's your market? I think things which like we really hadn't considered as much because we were coming from it as a scientific and more of a playful, and it was what we love to do. Like we love making things, we love making machines, but really how is this becoming more viable as a business was starting to become more and more the questions we faced. And so, yeah, I mean, this is actually like genuinely how we started. We all moved to my co-founder's house in Wales, did like multiple different material experiments to solve some of these issues. So at first we really wanted to create, you know, film applications, but one of the challenges we were having was like material barrier properties. We tried like 30 different experiments or more probably, and we would literally all be sleeping in his cabin in the middle of nowhere together. And so I think it was a really interesting startup journey for us because we really just like went in 100% super blind to like resources, things we would need, but we just really enjoyed doing this. Then we actually got some funding. We moved into like Somerset House. They have like Makeversity. We built like upscaled the types of machines. And I think really what we tried to do was like these 3-month sprints of just try and sell something, see if the world will take what we've created. And then getting their feedback, which was often quite harsh, that no, we probably won't buy this, into our process and then reiterating from there. And then, you know, slowly we actually started to refine our products and our offerings. So this is something that we created for a fragrance company that was looking to replace their tray insets, which are often covered in like a plastic foil in order to give it the aesthetic or the elevated aesthetic that they wanted. again, it kind of shows a little bit of our process of like really iterating, because then they were through another variable of us like, we want all of these 8 colors and we want you to Pantone match it. And we were like, oh God, like that's super difficult when you're working with natural materials, and we wanted to only incorporate natural dyes. So this was another snapshot. Random things we did. We were like, hey, maybe we can sell our sheets. No one would buy it. So then we made invitations for an exhibition, just trying to repurpose what we had and maybe target like a higher value market, work with like a fashion designer. And then now we're actually at the point where, you know, we have like a mass manufacturable formulation. We've been able to injection mold it. These are some examples of like our pellets and first kind of prototypes using that kind of technology. And so I think it kind of just shows the journey of like how we started as a student startup, like fairly naive about certain materials and manufacturing processes, to how we are quite now, where we have something that's very marketable, can hit kind of the costs and the economics that we really needed to make it a viable business. And yeah, this is again just now the snapshot to where we've grown now. So we have our own workshop, lab, that kind of thing. And you know, I think one thing for sure as students of LSE, if you guys are going on this journey, like definitely leverage the university. It's something that really helped us. They were one of our first early funders. They published a lot of like really good press about us that got us into scientific resources, which is quite difficult to do as a, you know, more student startup that doesn't have a scientific background. And yeah, I mean, they also really helped us define like who's on market, what's the value of our business, helps us build a team in the right way. So now we're no longer the 3 founders, we're about 5, and we're growing to about 8 at the end of this month. But I think, yeah, just to end on, it's still, this journey has been quite challenging and we've grown quite far, but we still keep very true to our principles, which is, you know, iterating really quickly and then using equipment like you find in kitchens to create our materials at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, I'll kind of leave it at that, and we can go into questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Insiya. Really fascinating to see the whole process, kind of like behind the scenes. Okay, then let's move on to Jess, to our third speaker.
Hi. First of all, thanks for having me, and those were really interesting presentations. A lot of really exciting work going on. So my name is Jess, and I started Jarr Market, which is a zero waste shop in London 2 years ago. Yes, we sell all sorts of food and toiletries and cleaning products, and we try to work with suppliers to create as many processes that are cyclical as possible. So I'm just going to open a presentation. Can you see that? Yes? Okay, cool. All right, so these are a few pictures from our shop. We sell dry foods. We sell stuff like lentils, flour, pasta, rice, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. We sell a lot of cleaning products like laundry liquids, hand soap, fabric conditioner, rinse aid. We sell olive oil. We have an oat milk machine, which you can see on the bottom, which, you know, you can bring in your bottles to refill on oat milk. We also have a peanut butter machine. So there's a picture of that at the bottom as well. We also sell a lot of just kind of like alternatives to plastic products. So for example, a lot of products that are made out of recyclable or compostable materials. So, you know, natural toiletries, like natural deodorants sold in glass jars. We also sell a lot of, for example, cleaning products made out of coconut fiber or loofah plants. Yeah, and we've grown, we have about 300 products now in quite a small shop. But, you know, we make the most of the space, and we've increased our products from about double from what we started with. So the pillars of zero waste, basically zero waste for us is, you know, sending zero to landfill. And we achieve this in a variety of ways. And the number one for us is buying in bulk to cut down on packaging. So most of what we buy is in big 25 kilo sacks, which are usually paper sacks. And that means that we're cutting down the amount of plastic or material that is used by it quite a lot. Number two is choosing recyclable materials. We always try to pick the best materials for recycling or for composting. Number three is we pay a private company to recycle any of our packaging that's left over privately so that it gets really well recycled. We pay extra for it, and they have a zero to landfill policy, and they are very transparent about, you know, their recycling policies and what they do and where everything goes. Number four is the most exciting, of course. We set up circular supply systems with suppliers, and a lot of these systems are very innovative. You know, they are, you know, trials in London, which later get rolled out to the rest of the UK. We kind of work really closely with them to communicate what works, what doesn't work. You know, we set up new systems for transporting the food and sending back the empty tubs, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But yes, we talk to them and we tell them this is what we'd like. And for some of the suppliers, it's their first time setting these kinds of systems up. So it's usually kind of an experiment to begin with, but it's worked really, really well so far. And lastly, we prioritize suppliers that are local, organic, ethical, you know, fair trade and plant-based. Yeah. So one of the kind of ways that we are circular and our customers are circular and we allow them to be circular is that they bring their own containers in, they refill from our containers, and there's zero waste in that way. We tell customers they can bring in any container they like. They can repurpose. Well, the point is that they repurpose what they already have. You know, we always tell customers that they don't need new fancy glass jars to refill. They should use anything they already have. Even if it's plastic, they should make the most of what is already sitting in their household. And people get very creative. You know, they sew, you know, canvas bags out of pillowcases, or, you know, repurpose wine bottles into olive oil bottles. And, you know, that's, for us, that's the best. We love that kind of stuff. It's also a way for customers to cut down on their food waste, because we encourage, you know, customers to obviously only take what they need. So for example, if you have a recipe that requires 1 tablespoon of paprika and you know you're never going to use paprika again, you can only take 1 tablespoon of paprika from us, and the rest that you might have to buy at the supermarket won't be going to waste, won't be sitting in your kitchen for years until you finally throw it out or do something with it. So this is a little bit how we work with suppliers. We have quite a lot of products now that are sent to us in tubs that we dispense from, and then when they're empty, we send back to the suppliers to get washed out, you know, properly with special machines and refilled and sent back to us. So for example, on the left, you can see these 20-liter tubs that our cleaning products come in. They are from a cleaning supplier in England called Phil, and they do all biodegradable natural cleaning products, kind of like Ecover, but smaller and more ethical. So these tubs, we dispense out of them. You can see the bigger tubs on the right, all-purpose and fabric conditioner. So we pour those into those, or we keep them in the tubs. And then in the middle, you can see one of our suppliers of these cleaning products is refilling them from the back of his truck. He either does that or he takes them back to the factory to get refilled, depending on what truck he has. On the bottom, you can see our tubs of granola. We work with a supplier called Rolla Granola, and they send us 3 different types of granola and organic nuts as well in these tubs that get sent back to them when they're empty to get reused. On the bottom right, you can see our coffee beans. Those get sent to us from Northeast London, from a supplier called Mission Coffee. And they're sent to us in these buckets, which seal off really well so that the coffee beans keep their quality. And those also get sent back. And then on the top, we have extra virgin olive oil and rapeseed oil. Those both come from Circular Supply as well. So the olive oil is from Greece. It's a very small grove. They're organic and pesticide-free and a really lovely company to work with. They bottle up their olive oil and send it to us in these tubs, which they receive back. They're looking at actually getting a sailboat so that they can do it with 0 emissions as well. And the rapeseed oil is sent from a farm in the Cotswolds, which also take these tubs back. A lot of our suppliers actually will work with zero emission vans, so electric vans like the one you see in the picture, to cut down their emissions as well. So obviously, very brief explanation. We try to set these systems up with as many suppliers as possible. So usually, we have a conversation with them and discuss what kind of material they could be sending their products to us in. And a lot of suppliers are really open to it. Some of them are a little bit more hesitant. But we're seeing a lot of growth in the products that we can get like this, and hopefully at some point it will be all of them. And just as a little little flavor of what can be achieved, I was running some numbers yesterday, and it looks like every month we're saving about 1,000 plastic bottles of cleaning products, and that's only from our range of cleaning products. Not even counting, olive oil bottles, all of the shampoo, conditioner, body wash, all of the pieces of plastic that people would have bought with pasta or rice or lentils. So I think from just a small shop, the impact can be huge. And more and more zero waste shops are popping up all over the country. So I think it's really a trend that is really important. So why haven't supermarkets done this? Obviously, it's going to be more work for them, but I think at some point they're going to have to if people are starting to demand this kind of change. But the real problem comes from further back in the supply chain. Obviously, the supermarkets have to work with the people who are actually packing up the food and changing that whole way that it works. So for example, let's say a supermarket decides to install the gravity bins that we have in the shop. At the moment, the only way they can receive cereal is in the packets of, 200 grams, which they would have to be emptying into those gravity dispensers, and which would not save any waste. So what needs to change is that they need to go back further and talk to their manufacturers, their suppliers, and get them to change the way that they package up food, which means maybe new machines or new ways of doing things, so that they're packing up in bulk in 20 kilos, 25 kilos, so that can trickle down into supermarkets becoming more zero waste. And, it's definitely more work refilling the dispensers, but there's big supermarkets in the US, for example, like Whole Foods, that make it work, and it's definitely a possibility. Yeah, and that's the end of that. Let me know if you have any questions.
Amazing. Thank you, Jess. I think, yeah, it's really interesting to see how, like, what is behind the scenes in this case, in the whole supply chain, and how it's not just by changing something on the surface that you create a like zero waste or circular system, but that there's a lot more involved. So yeah, for the audience, feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. And I see there is one hand. So Martina, I'll just hand it over to you to ask your question.
Thanks, Lara, and thanks to all the speakers for the brilliant presentations. I actually have a question for everyone, which is, for all the speakers, I mean, what was the biggest challenge on your journey of creating your businesses? I'm really curious to know about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to kind of dive in. I think it's not one challenge, but the ability to withstand many challenges potentially. So, you know, whether it's on the product itself, you have to pivot and be really nimble. You, as a small team, have to constantly learn new skills, some of which may not necessarily be your strengths. And then you need to have other people buy into your business and vision. I think that's something I've found really difficult, whether it even be in raising investment or building the right team, because those are two key things that you need to do as part of your journey. And it's quite difficult sometimes to convince the right people that they should be on this journey with you, because you're the one who's kind of had that passion and vision from the beginning. So I do think those are kind of some of the hardest bits of growing your business and continuing to get it to the next stage.
Yes, I agree. I mean, personally, I would say that it's not one thing that that I've had to tackle, but just staying motivated and kind of learning to follow your voice when there's so many opinions and struggles and obstacles. You know, there's a lot of new skills that you have to learn when you start a business, you know, learning all the legal terms and all to do your own taxes. And, you know, it's really easy to get overwhelmed by all of that. But if you just keep going and kind of trusting yourself, then it's also really important skills that you've picked up for, you know, life in general. And those can be translated to other parts of your life as well. So it's definitely a journey.
I think I would agree totally. I think there isn't just one big challenge. There are several small ones. And particularly in my case, I would say that in Germany, when founding a company, you have to deal with a lot of stuff that you, I'm guessing, most certainly don't want to spend too much time on, particularly when it comes to bureaucracy and communicating with offices and ministries, and not only tax, but reporting issues in general. And in my case, it was quite fascinating to see that potential change in, for instance, food that comes through startups like mine or several other startups. That change often happens faster than the change in basically bureaucracy, so regulative stuff. Because we, for instance, talking about organic certificates, in Germany, we have like 3 or 4 different big organic certificates. So basically labels that you could put on your product and have a, if you will, a qualitative measure. And because in the EU, we have the EU organic certificate, but in Germany, we have, like, if you will, higher valued organic certificates. And the products that I'm using for my beer are basically one of the bigger or better organic labels when it comes to the stuff that I'm putting into my beer. But I cannot put the label on my bottle because the, if you will, the organic association, so the regulative organization, didn't expect someone to replace brewing malt with old bread. So the big, if you will, paperwork of that association doesn't have that case in it. So I'm not allowed to put the label on my beer, although all the ingredients are in correspondence to the label. And I would have to get a, if you will, acceptive in Deutschland we say Ausnahmeregelung, so basically in a section that would take 2 years in order to get through. And I was just like, okay, guys, I don't want your label, I can deal without it, but it's a pity, you would say, because it is a big advantage in the shelf, in the supermarket, but I'm not able to enjoy it because bureaucracy is too slow to act to change.
Thank you for those insights. Yeah, as a native German, I can I can relate to like sometimes very slow processes. Yeah, I was wondering actually. I don't think there is any other question in the chat right now, or perhaps Ben, before you ask your question, just a quick follow up to Daniel. Were there any like other regulative difficulties in order to use the old bread for brewing the beer? Like, because I know there's this like, and I don't know much about it, but there's like this Reinheitsgebot, like this regulation around beer in Germany. Like, was that any problem?
No, but you have to do, if you will, some kind of extra steps, an official loop in order to get your beer approved. So we have something like a special permission for special beers, if you will, because there are basically 2 ways of producing a beer. Normally in England, the beer is obergärig. So the yeast that you put in the beer works at a higher temperature, because you can either brew it obergärig or untergärig. I don't know the English terms, basically. So at the end of the day, it's the temperature at which the yeast, if you will, produces alcohol. And the lower the temperature, the less you are free to experiment. Because classic beers like Pilsner or Bayerisch Hell, etc., there you cannot replace malt. You're not allowed to replace malt. But when using obergärig brewing techniques, you can replace malt with bread or with coffee or with whatever you like, but then you would have to get a special permission in order to be able to put beer on your labels. This is what we do. This is what takes a little bit extra effort, but it's possible. Lucky bet.
Fascinating, thank you. Yeah, Ben, if you want to ask your question.
Yes, I have a question for Jessica. I am actually quite curious regarding the Jarr Market. I've sadly so far not been, but I'm definitely planning on paying you a visit at some point. I was wondering regarding, you already talked about it. You already talked about, you know, the containers, the packaging, or that people bring, like where they put the stuff in when they come to your store. I was wondering, do you also have I don't know, like jars or whatever at your store that people can, I don't know, buy, or that they can take with them for deposit and bring back or something like that? And how does that work?
So we have paper bags that are recycled and compostable. And we also sell jars that are glass bottles, and also aluminium bottles for the toiletries, for example. At the moment, people can either bring their own or buy one or take a bag. But we are now, with another company, we are trialing a system of deposit scheme for our deliveries. So we would deliver, for example, your oat milk in a glass bottle, and then the next time we deliver to you, we pick up the empty bottle and we drop off a new one, and we get the empty one professionally cleaned. So that's something that we're trialing as of last month. So it's quite new, but it's quite exciting. I think it could be a really good opportunity for us as well.
So, but that would for now be for the ones that you deliver to people only, and not for people who come to the store, right?
Oh no, it could also be if you come to the shop, but just if you come to the shop, it's probably easier to refill it in that moment, because the oat machine is right there, so it's just a bit easier. But you know, that's also an option for sure.
Martina has another question.
So this one is specifically for Jessica. I was just wondering how you went about choosing your initial suppliers in the very beginning. This is something that I'm particularly curious about because I'm currently working on a project with another person who's present on the call now, George, which is a zero waste / sustainable products section in a shop on campus. So yeah, I wanted to know how you went about choosing your very first suppliers in the initial stages of setting it all up.
So luckily I took this course called How to Set Up Your Own Zero Waste Shop. And they walked us through a lot of really important information, including recommended suppliers and price margins and hygiene measures and everything. There's also a zero waste setup support group on Facebook that is very generous with sharing information about tips and suppliers and experiences that people have had. There's over 100 zero waste shops in the UK alone, so a lot of people have very there's a wealth of information on suppliers and ways to do things, and it's quite a nice community because people are up for sharing and people believe that the more zero waste shops exist, the better. So it's not kind of a competitive thing, which is very nice change. So I would recommend checking those out for sure.
Really useful, thank you.
Okay, there's just no other question at the moment. I have a question for you, Insiya. That is, so I found myself in this dilemma that I'm living somewhere where we don't have food waste or like a compost bin. So do you have any recommendations for what to do with packaging material that is compostable, but when you live somewhere where you can't do it at your home?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And so it really depends on whether most materials that say they're compostable can only be broken down by industrially composting facilities. So that's kind of the downside of it. Obviously, the ones that are home compostable, you can kind of throw in your backyard. And so those are that's kind of the golden standard to what now companies are building to, including ourselves. But practically speaking, for products that have to be industrially composted, like probably these coffee cups you're talking about, honestly, I don't know of many places. Like, I know certain universities have it, certain festivals have it so that they can keep a closed loop. But outside of that, there aren't many options, especially in the UK and in London.
And even for those that are compostable at home, do you know, are there any facilities where you can bring those things when you don't have a backyard?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, the only place that I know that you can do that is actually, it's a program run by UCL, where they have Big Home Compost, it's called. I'll definitely find the link and send it to you, but it's quite an interesting one where they just chuck different things in there in order to compost it, because they know there isn't anywhere that you could. And it also kind of confirms partly if the material is home compostable or is just claiming to be home compostable as well.
Thank you. Lucy has a question.
So it's also for Insiya, and I was just wondering if you can give us a range of products that you're building with the compostable seafood, and also have, you gave the example of the shirts, and so I'm just very curious to know, is it the shirt that you can wear several times, or would it just be a one-off and then it ends up
Yeah. So, I mean, we're looking at, right now, customers are in the cosmetics packaging market, and that's mostly because we're creating kind of containers and things like that, which aren't a single use, but have kind of a short life cycle. So a year, maybe 2 years at max. The shirt was a one-off thing. It was just more exploring what we could do with that material. And I think we like to do collaborations every 3 months or so and see whether an artist or a designer can kind of take our materials and figure out a new way to think about it, which we always enjoy exploring.
And then I see, I'm not sure if I pronounce your name right, but Jorge has a question.
Yeah, thank you. It's for Jessica again. So with the shop that we're trying to set up within LSE, we're finding that we need to sort of have one central supplier or provider of products. And I was wondering if you use mainly sort of smaller companies that are more specialized, or if you've dealt with sort of bulk, like sort of wholesale companies. That's all.
Yeah, so our main supplier is called Infinity, and they're a co-op in Brighton. They're pretty good. We have one main supplier for most of our food, and then we have smaller specialized suppliers for specific things like granola. But I'm happy if you have any questions, I'm happy to email. We can email about suppliers, and I can share some of the ones that we recommend as well, for sure.
That'd be great, thank you.
And Ben, you have another question.
Yes, I first have a question for Daniel. So what I was wondering, you are mostly, from what I've seen myself, active in Germany at the moment. How are you planning on like expanding? Is there any hope of seeing you in the UK at some point soon, or not? Yeah, I mean, just wondering in that regard, because obviously I would be more than excited to get myself a Knärzje soon.
I think unfortunately that would have to wait until you're back in Germany, because I don't think that I want to expand out of Germany. Since you guys by now do have a pretty decent bread beer as well. Actually one that inspired me, Toast Ale. These guys are, I think, in the market for nearly 7 years now. So I think they can help you with enjoying a pretty decent and sustainable beer. But when it comes to expanding here in Germany, I wouldn't say also not too far out of our region, since I think sustainability at our core, I don't see any big sense in selling my beer in, for instance, I don't know, Berlin or Hamburg. Although I was thinking about, if you will, putting up some sort of franchise licensing model that could help, if you will, put up regional production networks, for instance, in northern Germany, cooperating with a local bakery and brewery, and just sharing our knowledge and our recipes, for instance, our communication materials, etc., in order to come up with a knus, so not a Knärzje, but something that fits the regional markets there. So I would say I would restrict our sales activities to southwest Germany, where we are active. Anything further, not so sure about that.
That would have been my next question. Thanks a lot. I think that was a very sustainable answer as well, and that would have actually been my next question: in how far it's actually possible to expand due to the different formula that you obviously must have in comparison to the normal beer makers, let's say. But that sounds very, very interesting. I hope there will be Knust, I think we call it in Berlin. I'm not sure, but I hope there will be a Knust in Berlin soon, that I can then try when I'm there. And then, I mean, maybe if I come to Southwest Germany again, I will definitely have a Knärzje then. I will try to combine it with a trip that I will do anyways, in order to make it a little bit more sustainable. But thanks for the answer.
Of course.
And V has a question.
Yeah, I have a question for Insiya. I might have missed it, but when you were talking about your suppliers, I was just wondering how you are able to get that much seafood waste, especially in London, to your products.
Yeah, so I mean, we have now kind of partnerships with really large seafood industries. So we kind of targeted Maine, Nova Scotia, Ecuador, Vietnam, areas where it's already being created at a very large volume. And we have, like, as a starting point, a partnership with someone in Vietnam who actually deshells, just industrially deshelling. They're actually already work with the shells in order to increase the value by extracting proteins and minerals from food. And then as a byproduct, this biopolymer is actually just thrown away. And so we're taking that biopolymer from them. And they kind of process something up to 55,000 tons a year. So it's far greater than what we would need at the very moment.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
George, is your hand raised for another question, or is it still up from your last question?
Oh, that's my bad. It's still up from the last question.
Okay. Feel free to raise your hands for if you have any more questions, or type it into the chat if you don't want to ask yourself. Lucy.
So for Jessica, I've heard that a lot of supermarkets are quite hesitant on having some sections of zero waste, and you can buy in bulk because it attracts a lot of rodents in the storage of the food and in the supermarket itself. So we're just wondering, how do you deal with that, and particularly in this time of COVID, like if everyone has to touch everything to get this component like food and stuff, how do you go about that?
So I mean, we're very careful with hygiene in our storage room, but I think honestly, if a rodent is able to get through a sack of 25 kilos, like the material, they can also get through a small sack of 500 grams that is in a storage room of a supermarket. We keep all of our sacks in sealed boxes anyway, so everything is sealed away in the storage room, and obviously we vacuum a lot, to keep everything tidy. In terms of COVID, it's been almost a year that we've been serving customers at the door. So customers bring their containers and they just pass them to us, and we do all the refilling so that they're not touching, all the spoons and all of the jars and all the levers. Although I think now scientific data has shown that that's quite a low risk way of transmission. Like in terms of touching surfaces, I think the transmission rate is quite low with that. So it was more to be careful since we didn't know very much about. And also we're a small shop, so not very many people will fit inside. But hopefully in a few months we can go back to self-service and customers can come back into the shop to kind of browse as well and serve themselves. I think, if the supermarkets can pass the standard of hygiene just like we did, and if supermarkets in the US can find ways to keep their storage rooms hygienic, even though they have bulk sections, then I think supermarkets in the UK should be able to as well.
Okay, Ben has a question.
Yes, I have a question for Insiya. You were saying that at the moment you are working towards producing packaging for I think it was cosmetics companies. I was wondering how realistic it would be to also do packaging for food, as the sad and good thing about food is that they all need these best before dates, even though some of them are obviously just best before and not deadly after. But nonetheless, I think there's a lot of stuff which is in the shelves which doesn't last for that long anyway. So for these things, maybe your containers, even if they don't last for years to come, but for at least a long while, how realistic is it to maybe see stuff from Shellworks in supermarkets in a while?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're super passionate about moving into food packaging because that's where there's the biggest impact. I think strategically, or more realistically, it's just meeting a balance of volume, costs, and regulation. So to get our material regulated by the Food Association, it's going to take us 2 or 3 years, as well as trying to scale up to the volumes where the cost makes sense. Because if you think about it in food packaging, if the cost does go up by 10 cents, that's a very significant difference to the people who are buying it, versus in other industries, a 10 cents increase is not really making an impact to the end consumer. And so we would really need to be operating on the volumes of like 10 million units a year, which is quite substantial as an early stage startup. So I think our goal is in the next 2 or 3 years to get to that stage where we can kind of enter slowly the food packaging market, whether it be with a singular commodity and then growing from there.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question on that actually. So what are your, so since you kind of took us through the journey of like how you got where you are today, can you give us like, so you just mentioned food packaging, but what are the immediate next steps, like also perhaps where we might be able to see Shellworks packaging first?
Yeah, so I guess the immediate next steps is we're starting to do production for these cosmetic companies, whether it be things like cream jars, which are typically made out of plastic, or bottle caps, things like that. That's hopefully going to hit the shelves this summer and fall. And then to be honest, a lot of our work is on the R&D and that processing. So we need to we kind of work with the supplier on like a fermentation process, but that's something that we're looking to build ourselves and that capability in-house, which is quite substantial. So we're looking at how we can build, by fermentation, the processes around that first before we go and scale massively into the new industries. So that's kind of our two main focuses, is trying to validate our product in the market with customers, also to answer some of these questions around end of life for end consumers, and then in parallel work on our R&D and scaling up the raw material.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting how you kind of are like in the middle of like coordinating and testing the materials, like with the how they are manufactured, but then also meeting the demands of your clients. So yeah, really interesting. Ben has another question.
Yes, kind of going along the same lines, but asking Daniel again. So I already asked if you have any expansion plans, which you kind of explained that there's like, that's maybe not the most circular way to go forward. I was just wondering, what are then your next steps besides maybe opting for a franchise with Knärzje? What are you planning? Are there any new ideas maybe in the pipeline as well? Yeah.
We just got into retail. So we just partnered up with a bigger supermarket chain here in Germany and are now all over Southwest Germany, which is quite exciting. And so first step now would be since we got into supermarkets, to stay in them, because as far as I'm concerned, getting into supermarkets, at least for me, wasn't that difficult, because we could choose between the chains that are most fitted for us, or best for us in terms of mindset and values, etc. Because all the big chains asked for our beer. So now it's all to staying in supermarkets and to sell our products. So basically doing all the communication and marketing work now, which is of course a little bit limited because we cannot do that in person due to COVID. And we do not have the chance to do events, which is my greatest passion, in order to talk to people and to do stuff with them directly and not just via online marketing and such things. And of course I do have other product ideas, particularly when it comes to working with Treber in Germany, we say, so that the leftovers from beer production, because we've done experience turning that into granola and energy bars, because basically it's full of protein and better for human food than for pig food, if you will. But yeah, we are just doing some tests, and also we try to incorporate that into baking new bread, basically. So going completely loop here, turning bread into beer and then beer into bread again. So yeah, I think creativity has no limits, and we try to do as much as we can here.
Very cool. I think I really like this metaphor in a way, or this image of turning bread into beer and turning beer into bread. That would definitely be a nice slogan. Very, very cool. Thanks.
I have another question also for Daniel. So it's kind of along the lines that so we talked about for zero waste stores, like how that relates to big supermarkets and what big supermarkets can do. So when looking at that, like in the beer industry, and you mentioned in your presentation like how many tons there are of bread waste. So with this concept of turning old bread into beer, something that could also the bigger beer companies take on to make their own menu, like beer brewing more circular?
I think there is quite a lot of potential, particularly in the conventional, if you will, food industry to do more sustainable stuff, not only going organic, for instance, but also coming up with circular approaches. Because I think the big breweries here in Germany, they, if you will, give their spent grains to those biogas facilities. So basically they burn them. But of course they could work with farmers, for instance, turning that into animal feed, or even because I think although of COVID, they do struggle a little bit, they still have, I think, financial reserves in order to do some experiments, come up with their own products, for instance, in the dry categories. Like I said, doing some granola or bread or energy bar stuff. And I think there are, particularly in universities, lots of scientific groups that search in a way that how spent grains can be turned into, for instance, protein isolates and then be functional food in whatever end product. I think there is a lot of research going on as far as I'm concerned. I think it's quite interesting. But of course, then going to the end consumers, turning it into products, money is a big thing. And so big corporates would need to step in order to say, yeah, we do fund a pilot project and do a product with that. I think the big chains here in Germany aren't that full of courage, because as of now it costs more money than maybe there are benefits, because it's quite cost intensive to start it, and if you haven't scaled it up in the first place, of course you have to invest. And
yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, Ben, you have another question.
Yes, I'm not sure if it's a really question, but towards Insiya again, I've recently watched a documentary on these gigantic crabs that they have in Norway, I think it was, which came, I think, from Asia, were introduced, and now they're like growing there in population numbers like crazy because they have no natural predators and so on. So they're like, I think they're called king crab. They're gigantic. They're like literally going up to 1 meter in size, and they're eaten there in like huge quantities. I'm most certain that they are also peeled there, because they're too big to be like shipped again and then shipped back and so on and so forth. So I was wondering if you were aware of that, and maybe whether that would also be a good source for you, because obviously Norway is closer than Vietnam.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've been looking at, to be honest, it's not necessarily just because it's in Vietnam that we went for it. I think they have a lot of like really interesting sustainable practices. So they themselves, as a supplier, reuse water 10 times and things like that. And so if you actually look at the carbon footprint, shipping it, yes, it's not amazing, but at the same time, it's much better than the other practices that other suppliers have locally in Europe. So that's kind of where we made the decision. I hadn't heard about this particular one, to be honest. Definitely, I know something that my co-founders would be interesting. They would just genuinely be interested, so I'll definitely pass it along.
I can definitely send you the video with the link.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, it's actually like a real problem in Norway. I mean, for the fishing industry, it's amazing, but for everything else, it's a catastrophe. So the whole ocean floors are full with these crabs now, because there's literally nothing that kills them. So yeah, I will send you the video later.
Yeah, definitely.
Fascinating. Okay, learning about giant crabs. I think we're almost at the time limit. So I think since there's no other raised hand that I can see, I have one last question to Jess, and that is to, so I feel like a lot of people or customers are a little intimidated by like thinking about shopping zero waste because they perhaps don't really know how it works, or it just seems a little, I mean, it's just not what we're used to because we're so used to just going to the supermarket and grabbing something that's wrapped in plastic. So perhaps to close us off, what is your advice for someone who would like to get started and just try zero waste grocery shopping out?
Yeah, I mean, we get new people all the time, and honestly, they end up enjoying it so much. It's really satisfying to kind of go home and realize that you don't have any rubbish to put in the bin. A lot of people think that it's going to be more expensive than shopping at a supermarket, but we do a lot of work to keep our prices very reasonable. And a lot of people, when they leave, they're surprised by actually how affordable it is, especially with very basic foods. We also have, you know, very nice foods like vegan chocolates and stuff like that that are, you know, a high quality item, but our basics we always keep to very reasonable prices. And we're always, you know, happy to explain how things work and give tips. And you know, even if you don't have a zero waste shop near you, there's always things that you can do, like buying your fruit and vegetables loose. There's also like really good fruit and vegetable boxes like the Odd Box, which, you know, save food waste. There's, you know, so much you can do in terms of not buying clothes you don't need, switching to a renewable energy supplier. There's just like so much that one can do on an individual level, even though, you know, zero waste shops are not everywhere. But more specifically, I would say just try it. You know, even if you come in and buy one product, you're going to love it. And people are usually very friendly.
Thank you. That's very encouraging. And I think the perfect message to send us home. So yeah, thank you to all three of our speakers. I learned a lot, and just like very, very diverse perspective that you gave. And yeah, I hope the audience enjoyed the talks as well. And yeah, I hope you have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. It's really nice.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Take care, stay healthy.